Part 1.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now listen and answer questions 1 to 6.
So, what was it like in your school then, Lynn?
Well, South African schools are very different from schools in Australia. For a start, children don't start their schooling until they are 7, quite a bit later than schools in Australia. What about New Zealand, Gail?
We're more like Australia. I can't believe children don't go to school until they're 7. When do the parents get any free time?
Well, there's still the availability of kindergartens or play schools. It's just that formal education doesn't start until later. I don't think it's such a good idea for children to have to be too academic at such a young age. They should be able to just enjoy themselves.
Well, yeah, but the first school children go to isn't really very academic. It's just an opportunity for children to learn a few basic social skills by playing and learning with other children.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
I guess being so close, Australian and New Zealand schools must be similar then.
Well, I suppose they do share a lot of similarities, but there are also some differences. For example, children in New Zealand go through intermediate school, but in Australia there's only high school. That's right, isn't it, Pat?
Yeah, I think so. What about South Africa, Lynn? Do you have an intermediate or high school?
Oh, high school.
And now the difference between Australian and New Zealand education is that although both countries have state schools and private schools, our private schools are very often run by religious groups, whereas New Zealand schools are secular.
That's not true. There are quite a few religious schools in New Zealand.
Oh, OK, maybe we are similar.
Only a few South African schools have any religious connection, so I guess we're different. Most people go to state schools. Pat, is it true that some people from your country don't have to go to school at all?
Well, that's partly true. Because of the geography of Australia, there are a lot of children who do not have access to schools, at least on a regular basis. Instead, they have a form of correspondence education, where the lessons are actually on the radio and the students send their work in by post. That way they get a lot of what they would if they were in the classroom, apart from the interaction.
In New Zealand, not all students have to go to school either. Some parents have opted for homeschooling.
Oh, is that like correspondence teaching? We don't really have that.
Well, we do have correspondence schools, but homeschooling is different. With homeschooling, the parents teach the children and set them homework. They have to present a syllabus to their local education authority before they can do that, but it is becoming a more popular choice for some parents. I suppose it also suits parents' own commitments. I mean, they don't have to worry about collecting their children from school, and they can always teach over the weekend or in the evening if they want to.
Is the school day normally quite long then?
Not in New Zealand, but I think it can be in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. I think Australia is unusual in that there are extracurricular activities which you have to go to.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
These are normally sport activities, but there are a few other options.
We have activities after school for any student that is interested, but they aren't compulsory. What about in New Zealand, Gail?
I had to do some sport every week. I didn't really like it, but it was part of the school day, so I guess that's not so bad. Anyway, I spent 2 years at boarding school, so things were a little different.
Boarding school? What was that like?
Well, the thing I remember most about it was the strict dress code. There were restrictions on everything. You had to wear a school uniform almost all of the time, and it had to be cleaned and ironed. The length of your skirt had to be no less than 1 inch above your knees when kneeling down. Sometimes we used to go out on school trips or just at weekends with a few friends, but whenever we were outside the school we had to wear a hat. There was one teacher who always used to give me extra homework because my socks weren't pulled up. And that was in the school late in the evening. I suppose it wasn't that bad, but at the time it felt like a prison. I kept getting into trouble for something. Most of the time I forgot something, normally my school badge. We had to wear that all the time, in the school and out, because it had our house colours on it.
Wow, that doesn't sound like much fun.
No, but it was a good education, I suppose.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear a student, Alex, asking his tutor for advice about essay writing.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 17. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 17.
Hi, Alex. Come in. I gather you wanted some help with writing essays.
Yes, I'm finding this first term difficult, and I'm worried about the assignments we have to do for January.
Well, let me see if I can help. You shouldn't panic about it, because essay writing is a very straightforward process, really. What it involves is organising the information that you want to include. You shouldn't have more than you can easily manage within the word count. Make sure you haven't got too much or anything irrelevant. You need to look at that and work out what you need and what you don't need before you start. And then you just have to think about how you're going to put forward your argument.
Oh, that sounds very straightforward when you put it like that. But I'm worried I haven't got the necessary skills for writing an effective essay because English is my second language.
Well, perhaps you misunderstand the skills you need. You need to be able to analyse your data, and then I would say the skills of interpretation and expressing yourself are important. Perhaps it's this last one that bothers you, but the more essays you write, the more you will develop these skills.
Yes, and I don't quite know how to improve at that. Though, as you say, I know practice will help. And I need to make sure I've got everything ready before I start.
Yes. What is vital to good essay writing is preparation. So make sure you build in enough time to do the research you need.
Are there any other sources I can use to help me with essays?
Yes. You should go to the library and look through the reference section, because there are books that focus on the style we use in academic writing, and those will help you a lot. The other thing that you should think about is what happens when you've actually written your essay. Too many students just complete their work and hand it in, whereas what you should be doing is making sure that you edit it as thoroughly as possible.
Oh, yes, that's a good idea. Then I'd pick up any mistakes and also see if it reads logically.
Exactly. The other thing is, again, what a lot of students do is get their essays back, look at the marks, then just file it away. They don't realise that if they checked it through and looked at what the tutor had written, then they can learn from their old essays.
Yeah, I can see that's a good idea.
So, is that okay? You can always come back to me.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 18 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 18 to 20.
Actually, there were a couple of other things I wanted to ask you about essay writing.
Uh-huh.
I had a few thoughts of my own about what I should do, such as really taking good notes when I'm reading, because that helps, doesn't it?
I think it improves your knowledge rather than your actual writing. But one tip I can give you is to try and not read too much. Otherwise, you end up including irrelevant material in your essay. Remember to stay on task.
Yes. Sometimes I have problems interpreting the questions correctly, or the whole question seems overwhelming to me. What I try to do is highlight the key parts and divide it into smaller chunks so I can manage it.
Well, you might find it useful to break it down even further by making sure you understand all the words perfectly before you start. Things like assess or comment and such like.
Yes, I see.
Sometimes, after an objective analysis, the question actually asks you for a subjective opinion, but you must remember to support your arguments if that's the case. One final comment I can make is about using your own words. You must try to do this as far as possible. You're expected to summarize what you've read, not just string together a list of quotations. In fact, you shouldn't have too many. Just use them where it's really important.
Okay, thanks.
Do you read other students' essays when you've finished?
No. Why? Is that a good idea?
Well, you can confuse each other, so I'd advise against it. But it's up to you.
Okay. Thanks very much for your time.
The end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
Listen to a female student, Amina, talking to her tutor, Dr. Bryson, about her project on local history. Amina has completed a first draft of the project. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully to the first part of the discussion and answer questions 21 to 26.
Well, Amina, thanks for letting me have your draft in such good time.
Oh, that's all right. I was just very anxious to hear what you think of it. You can see that I decided to change the topic. I had been interested in looking at Bering's factory.
Oh, I think the hospital was a much better choice. In fact, well, I have to say that I thought it was good.
Oh.
There's still lots of work to be done.
Oh, yes, of course.
But there's plenty of good ideas. It opens well, and the first chapter is fine, but the middle section really stood out for me. Most interesting.
That's amazing, because I really didn't find it a bit easy to write.
How long did you work on the whole thing?
Well, I spent about 2 or 3 weeks reading and doing general research, and then I dashed the writing off very quickly. So about 4 weeks in all.
Well, that's about par for the course. You've got a while yet to make the changes.
Oh, right. No problem.
Right. Let's have a look at my notes here. Okay, starting with section headings. The broad divisions are good, but you'll have to redo the actual headings. I've made some suggestions in the margins.
Okay, thanks.
Now, this information on local housing. I can see why you put it there, but it really isn't relevant to the approach you've taken.
I think I see what you mean.
Now, what did I say about the interviews?
Oh, I worked very hard on those. I really thought they were valuable.
Oh, they are, Amina, but they're very complex and rather unclear at the moment. You're going to have to spend a bit of time making the data a lot clearer.
Okay, as long as I don't have to remove them altogether.
No, don't worry.
What about the chronology, the list of dates? I wasn't sure whether I should rewrite those.
My advice on that is to take them out. I feel it makes the whole piece appear too simplistic.
Okay, if it'll help.
Now you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen to the rest of the discussion and answer questions 27 to 30.
Now, there are a couple of other books I'd like you to look at. Have you got a pen? Right. Approaches to Local History by John Mervis.
Right.
And then I think you need to think about ways of representing interview data. Have a look at Sight and Sound by Kate Oakwell.
Sight and sound.
And you know I'm going away on holiday next week.
Yes.
So when you've made the changes, I suggest you show the work to your support tutor.
Support tutor. Right.
Then you do the proofreading.
Proofreading. When by, do you think?
I'd aim for the 29th of June. And after that, you should get it laser printed. But be careful, because the computer center closes on the 10th of July.
And then I hand it in to...
Oh, the faculty office, as usual.
Okay, that's fine. I think I'm all set now. Thanks very much for all your help.
A pleasure. See you when I get back.
Yep. Thanks, Dr. Bryson. Bye.
Bye.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear a talk given by a university lecturer about the impact of environmental noise on a proposed building site. Before you hear the talk, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 35. Now listen carefully to the first part of the talk and answer questions 31 to 35.
Good afternoon. I'm Paula Bundle, and I am giving you the lectures on environmental noise this term. Today, we're going to look into the effects of noise on a planned housing estate in a particularly difficult part of the new Manchester Park area. This site is not as bad as some I have researched in the past. The Blacktown Airport is closed from 6 p.m. to 7 a.m, and this is a great advantage to the site. The only noise after dark is from the highway, and the traffic is somewhat reduced between 7:30 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. So the people most affected by the noise will be, I expect, housewives. By the time most of the students and workers have arrived back home in the evening during the week, the noise will have abated to a fairly large extent. The weekends are still a problem, of course, but the traffic is certainly reduced on Saturdays to a large extent, and even more so on Sundays. Of course, modifications to houses will be necessary at a site like this, and they come at a significant cost to the developer and home buyer. The modifications I'm about to outline will add about $25,000 to the price of a newly built house. That will still mean a cheaper house than in a less noisy and more desirable area. A bit of background would not go astray. I understand that you are all familiar with the proposed development site at Manchester Park. It's a particularly difficult one in terms of noise, with the highway along the eastern perimeter and the Blacktown Airport not 3 kilometres away to the north. Of course, those nearest the highway will be the worst hit, with heavy traffic noise as well as the noise from the light planes overhead. As you all know, the normal noise threshold for private housing is 55 decibels. At this site, the levels have been recorded as high as 67 decibels.
Before the talk continues, you have some time to look at questions 36 to 40. Now, as the talk continues, answer questions 36 to 40.
The construction of the houses has to be somewhat modified from houses in most areas. In the houses on the highway and in the noisiest areas of this site, there will be a need for specialised double glazing, and special acoustic seals will have to be fitted to the doors. All exterior doors in this especially noisy pocket will have to be solid core wood doors with hinges. Every house built on this site, not just those adjacent to the highway or nearest to the airport, will require high-density insulation materials in the roof. Not only will all the roofs need insulating, the exterior walls will be required to be double brick. All ceilings will require double-thickness plasterboard to be used in the construction. In the noisiest areas, mechanical ventilation will have to be installed in the exterior walls. In those areas with sealed windows, it will be necessary to fit fans with absorbers to cut out the noise in those particular houses. Air conditioning units could also be fitted in the ceilings of such houses, but this is substantially more expensive than fans and may not be needed on this site. Coming back now to the double glazing I mentioned before, specialised double glazing requires a larger air gap between the inner and outer glass than normal double glazing. The gap must be at least 7 centimetres. The thickness of the glass is also a factor, 8 millimetres on the outside and 6 on the inside pane. It's essential that the glass be thicker on the outside than on the inside, and that the gap between the panes of glass be a minimum of 7 centimetres. Obviously, the noise factor will have to be taken into consideration with the layout of the houses. Living areas will have to be designed at the back of the houses, away from the highway. Bedrooms and living rooms will have to be built towards the back. And for those houses closest to the highway, 2 layers of plasterboard will be needed for the interior bedroom walls. Those rooms constructed at the front of the houses should be garages, laundries, kitchens, bathrooms and dining rooms. I have come to the conclusion that this development should go ahead, but with various acoustic modifications according to the position of the block in relation to the highway and intersection.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
I might grab a bat, I don't know, my wrath, my blood boils over like, oh God, here goes. I lost all feeling from my head to my toes. You said some shit that I can't let go, so just stay tuned for the rest of the show. So have you ever felt betrayed? Switches how you see things, realize something needs change. 'Cause I